So I'm Mark Errol, and I start my wheel process by throwing mugs. It's my bread and butter as a maker. It's the thing that really makes it easy for me to get loosened up in the morning in the studio, and I like starting with small, kind of easy pots to get the process going. As a teacher, I don't always get to make pottery the way I used to, as far as quantity, and sometimes it's been a while since I've thrown pots, so I always like to start off with simple things that I know are going to be useful, functional, and as I said, they're kind of like the bread and butter of my making. They're the thing that help me, I don't know, I work out ideas through these forms. I work out kind of interactions with people. They're accessible objects. Everybody loves coffee cups. So I enjoy that process of making them, knowing that they're going to be functional objects in someone's life. I got into functional pottery mainly because I wanted to be an architect and an interior designer of some kind. And the math scared the patoots out of me. And as a young man, I didn't understand that there was other ways around that. But when I got introduced to ceramics, it was something that had been constant in my life. I had a lot of people in my life that worked with clay in different ways, but it was my high school teacher. And my high school teacher wasn't allowed to teach us ceramics. I went to such a small school in upstate New York that we didn't have the facilities, but she would sneak clay to me in my own kind of time with her and help me understand the material a little bit, and I'd take it home and make things and bring them back to her, and then she'd fire them for me. And I never took it seriously. I just liked the material as an object, or as a material to kind of play with. And it wasn't until I went to college that I saw the possibility of it as a real artistic outlet. Again, wanting to be an architect and interior designer or something like that wasn't in the making, so I was doing all this kind of other art making, painting, drawing. I was really into jewelry making, but I was taking ceramics, and one of my professors said, "Have you ever considered this seriously?" And it was funny that this thing that I had kind of dismissed all my life as just being there was actually the thing that I was supposed to be doing for the rest of my life. And that all of a sudden made sense to me. And here I am, over 20 plus years, closing in on 25, of kind of working in this material. And it's pretty outstanding to think that something so basic can give me life. It can give me the sentiment of involvement with people, the community. I mean, here I am sitting on the front porch of an art gallery we own in a small town because of this, you know? That kind of blows my mind still, every day. So, making pots came out of the idea of wanting to be involved in the home environment, and knowing that I wasn't going to be designing that home. The idea that somebody takes my pots home to their environment still puts me in that space, still allows me to engage with them in some way, and actually in a more intimate way, because they're touching it, they're drinking from it, they're eating from it, they're looking at it, they're sharing it with people that they bring into their home, and that's really kind of special, and it never gets lost to me that, how lucky I am to be a part of that ritual. My students and I talk about how ceramics for me was the first time I had that aha moment as a maker. And that we're all kind of always looking for that thing that challenges us, makes us frustrated in the best way as makers, makes us think about what's next. Because as an artist, we're never satisfied. And if you are, then you should stop. If you think you've got the answer, then you should stop. But clay is the other material for me that is always boss. Is always going to be the champion of like my time. So as a maker of any kind, we love tools. Potters love tools. So I'm using a sponge to keep the clay wet, and I'm using these little things called ribs. Ribs are kind of shaping tools. They come in metal, wood, plastics. And for me, like everybody else, when you start doing something, you start to find out what works best for you to make the work you make. So we alter them, we cut them, we shape them. So I'm using metal kind of little flexible ribs, and they allow me to push and mold the clay in the ways that I define as my shapes. They're my brush strokes. The fingers are really the brushes, for me. And I enjoy that process of using tools to kind of define the way I see something in my head and kind of ultimately bringing it to fruition. And then this is one of my other favorite tools that I have. We call it a throwing stick, or not a throwing stick, excuse me. I don't even know what I would call it. Just a forming piece of wood. They come in all billions of shapes and sizes, but this one was made by another guy named Troy Bungart, who's a potter. So I love that he made it with his knowledge of making, and I picked it up, and I use it all the time, and it's kind of the way I finish my pots at the bottom as a way to help define that shape the last time. Other people use them in different ways. I'll show you one way. They might take this and rub it across the surface to create texture. This is not what I normally do, but I like the way it kind of will emphasize what I'm talking about. And then when I push out on that, it creates nice texture on there for the glaze to interact with later. As a teacher, I think it's really important that I don't make students into mini-me's. So I'm always trying to show them things that I don't normally do in my own work, because I really don't want to make this collection of people that make what I make. I want to give them the tools to make what they want to make. So yeah, just even doing that was fun, and I'll bring it back to the classroom tomorrow. I'll tell a funny story if I can. I was a metalsmith kind of focused student taking clay at the same time, trying to decide which one was more important to me. And I had a metalsmithing teacher, Myra Mimlich Gray, who came to me when I was making the decision, and she said, listen, I love you in metals and I can see you having a path in this, but every day you're getting cut, burnt, stuck in something. This might not be the path for you. And she said, but clay seems to be coming more naturally for you. And I agreed with her. So I always kind of look at her as the person that gave me that redirection. And over the time, I'm constantly inspired by other artists, which is why we have a gallery. Having a gallery is not just about what I like, it's about what we think other people should know about and see. And that's why we represent over 80 artists here at Plow now, from all over the country, because we get to say, you know what, we think people in our town would be really into this, or they've never seen anything like this, so let's ignite that for them. So that's really exciting as a way to say inspired by what got me going. A couple of years ago, full circle, the person, Kathy King, that gave me the drive to do this actually came here, curated a show, gave a talk, and I still get goosebumps 3 years later talking about that the reason I do what I do 20 plus years later is standing in the space that I'm creating to help do that to other people. And our students seeing that clay, and I was talking to you about this earlier, is the idea that community is what ceramics is for me, and that I work in a field where I can invite the biggest, most exciting artists in my field to come hang out with me. What? That's crazy. You can't say that about a lot of art fields, because those people don't see that value in sharing that information the same way. So I take my pots, I throw very basic forms, and I'll show you another one I'm going to throw now. And I really do, I guess as an artist, I always thought of myself as an illustrator or somebody who wanted to put something on a 2D format initially. I love drawing. I draw every day. It's a part of my process no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm thinking about pottery or if I'm thinking about anything. Home still. I still start with the home. I still, and you'll see on my pots that the surface is based on the idea of home. So drafting, all that. So when I'm making forms, I'm making very basic forms as canvas to then illustrate the narrative that I have in my head. Over years, that process has changed from being something that was quite literal, and the longer I do it, the less interested I am in being literal with my surface, but it's still pretty accessible as far as the content is. I'm looking at floor plans always as like, I always want to make my dream house. I'm always thinking about what my dream environment's going to be. So I use the surfaces and I draw in graph paper. My sketchbooks are always graph paper because I love the grid as this format of containment. So my pots now really start to show that more literally. And then I use color that I transfer from paper. So I don't actually paint directly on the pot myself often. I actually work in a process of image transfer. So if you think of temporary tattoos, I put color on paper, a clay material called underglaze that I pigment, I mix myself with different colors to make my own palette. And then I cut out shapes. So process for me is about, this is the easiest part, is the making the pots for me, or the quickest part. The decorating is what I really am interested in. I'm interested in spending time with each pot and making individual moments. So that process of decorating, creating the paper transfers, that's actually the longest part for me, is that I spend probably about a week solid in my studio just painting paper with this underglaze material, making swaths of color that I eventually then will sit and cut up randomly. And they end up in a giant bucket of just tiny little shapes on paper of color. And my old process was very literal for me in that I was looking at pattern and color and then replicating it. Now, what I'm really interested in is the spontaneous kind of reaction to the form and the shapes that I find in my bucket of color and how they're going to interact to help me tell the story that is unfolding rather than me curating or telling. So that process of making the paper, cutting it up, that can be a week or more for me, where I can throw 30 or 40 pots in a weekend, and then they're my canvases for the next 2 months of making. The thing that I have to tell my students is so important, I'm really horrible at. Again, back to the mugs, those are my bread and butter. So I kind of look at the market and I think, what am I doing in that market that is equal to other artists that I respect and kind of sell at? I think, so I keep that pricing pretty steady. As I like to make individual pieces, I have to price them individually. I don't look at time because I could never sell something based on time. I like to sell it on the idea that I'm making an object so specific that somebody else is going to have to engage with, that if they really like it, they'll pay for it. I don't make my living off of this. I make my living off of teaching and sharing information and those little small mugs and things like that. And that's kind of the reason I became a teacher, in the sense that it allows me to make the work I want to make and not think about the product as what I have to survive on. I've tried doing that. I have the utmost respect for production pottery and potters that do that. I think that is the most wonderful thing. right now I'm I'm using another rib to define the inside of this bowl. So this curve right here is actually going to help me mimic the inside of that shape of that bowl so that I get a nice swoop. That's a technical term. Swoop. Or as I like to tell my students, when I ladle the ice cream, I don't want to miss anything. So I want a nice, clean, even bottom. So that's what I'm working on the inside right now. But yeah, I like to make pots that come from me wanting to tell the story of why I do what I do, which is back to the home. Everything is about the home or space or ownership of space. I think, not to get too kind of esoteric, or I don't know what you want to call it, but I'm really inspired by the idea of ownership of space. Like, as an artist, this is really the only space I own right now in this moment. And once it leaves me and it goes to somebody else's environment, I still think I own that spot in their house. You know what I mean? Because I don't own my own spaces, really. You know, everything that I do is about sharing. So this moment, the pots I make, it's all about ownership of space. And that's the way I get to say I have little moments in life that are mine. I don't know if that sounds too weird, but that's the truth. That's why I make these pots, or what I'm thinking about when I'm making these pots.
That's good. So walk us through the process from this point. What will you do next with this? I will talk about cutting the colors and all, but
I will take these pots into the studio, let them get leather hard. Leather hard is the next stage of drying, where the clay is still malleable a little bit, but it's holding its shape. There's a couple of stages in there that it gets a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder. And in that stage is where I'm kind of cutting into the pots with a razor blade to incise and embed color into the pot so that it's smooth. And then as the pot is drying, I'm cutting and pasting these little pieces of color on with water, rubbing them on with my ribs, and then peeling the paper back and leaving what color from the paper is transferred to the pot. So it's a transfer of like temporary tattoos as kids. Put it on, pull it off, and it stays. That's what I'm doing. I'm kind of tattooing my pots with color. And then I fire it once, which is called the bisque stage, where the clay actually becomes ceramic. And a lot of people don't understand that clay and ceramic are synonymous, but it's actually where clay becomes ceramic, is in that bisque stage where it transforms and can never be turned back to clay. If I take this pot, put it in a bucket of water, let it break down, I can wedge this up and keep using it and keep using it and keep using it. But once it becomes ceramic, I can pulverize that clay into a dust, but it'll never hold the molecular same way as clay. Then once it comes out of that, I glaze it. So I use a mixture of chemicals that minerals and stuff that I put together, and I coat the piece in a clear glaze. A lot of people like the glazing process because it brings the pot to life in a different way. For me, I'm just coating the object in a clear glaze to heighten the surface that I've created with those colors. I want it to be like a glaze on a painting, something that's going to bring those pops of color out. This defines for me kind of the idea of what space is about. When you get this piece, you think it's complete, but really there's this whole other world down below that unless you explore, you don't get to see. And I like to think about it as function also, because when you put the flowers in here, they have this presence and they have this environment, and there's this separation between surface and kind of their existence, but yet it ties back to the idea of home. But I also like the idea that when you pull this out, then you have this ability to clean and kind of engage with the piece in a different way. And I really, even though they're kind of showy big pieces, I still want people to function with them. I still want them to interact with them.
Absolutely.
That's really exciting for me.
That is very cool. That was kind of a little secret hidden compartment in there.
Yeah, I like to do that with everything. So on the bottoms of my pots as well, there's always chairs. And the chair, you can see, kind of comes from in my tattoos as well.
Oh, yeah.
Is really important to me to talk about domesticity and the idea of like home and being present. And so that's always kind of there in some way, shape, or form.
So that's your brand.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's just the thing that makes me think of why I do what I do and remind them, others of why I do what I do too.
I gotcha.
And you know, these aren't objects that you just pick up and kind of casually engage with.
Right.
So I love to keep rewarding people.
Yeah.
You know, like over time, they're like, oh, there's more to unveil, you know,
Yeah,
to be revealed.
yeah.
So
First glance doesn't do it justice.
right, inside, interior versus exterior. Again, the home. Thinking about what we put inside and how we present it on the outside.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really important to me because I think we all live in this idea that what we see from the outside is the reality.
Right.
And unless you engage with what's on the inside, you never get the true story.